Oh my. George Jones there this morning, folks. Good afternoon, fellow constitutionals, and welcome to the Free-4-All-Friday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is December 22nd in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And we do what we do here at the Dan Clements Show, knowing the fear of the Lord. We persuade folks of the truth. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the overcast Central Susquehanna Valley in the Great Keystone State. I'm thankful for you all being here. I'm thankful for everybody following me on Facebook, on Twitter. I do have the. Let me check it again. I'm pretty sure that the Stitcher feed is up and running with the new address, the URL going into the podcast aggregator. I'll check that again after the show. I did check it a little bit before the show, and it seemed like they got everything working on that. So hopefully if you were listening to this on Stitcher, and I know I had quite a few folks on Stitcher listening to it, and I'm just checking in my email, make sure I didn't see anything come through other than they just told me last night to just check on it to see if it's working or not. So I have the Stitcher going again. I think iTunes is going to take a little bit longer for some reason. Getting a hold of somebody at support in iTunes is nigh on impossible, especially when it comes to podcasting, because and this is just the way iTunes is, and this is just information for folks who might be podcasting, you might think about podcasting. iTunes gives you no control over your feed. Well, I won't say no. It gives you so little control. The only thing you can do is change your podcast feed URL, and then it has some of the strictest criteria on that feed URL. And if it doesn't pass their criteria, you can't change it. And I've emailed support, have not heard anything back saying, what do I need to do to get this up and running on your, podcast feed, for my show? And it's, like I said, it's nigh on impossible to get a hold of anybody there in support. I would never even try to get a hold of them on the phone, let alone do much of anything else. So I just email them, and hopefully we get that straightened up. I am in the process, the one podcast service that Bluehost and WordPress uses is Blueberry, Blubrry. So, and that's a podcast service, and I'm trying to change the URL feed for that also. They want me to host my podcast on there, and they're too expensive. They're just way too expensive to host my podcast on there. So I'm just using them as a podcast feed once I get that set up, and I'll be putting that out on my podcast feed. I'm going to make a page up on the DanClementsShow.com when I get everything straightened out here. I will be, for those of you that might be following the show on YouTube that were used to listening to the program on Blog Talk Radio, I am going to go through this afternoon and upload all of this week's programs on Blog Talk Radio and start circulating them back out on Blog Talk Radio. Because I've had some comments saying we miss your show, and a lot of it was coming from Blog Talk Radio hits and not iTunes or Stitcher. Although I was getting more from Stitcher than I was from iTunes. However that works out, but anyway, so we're doing that on the show here. I'm just trying to think of some stuff that I have been doing. I've been getting caught up. Like I said yesterday, I got caught up on all my Blog Talk Radio, getting rid of the old episodes so I can start putting new episodes on, because having a free account, I'm only allowed to have 30 hours of podcasts on there. So basically what I'm going to do is each week, at every Friday, I'm just going to upload the whole week and keep only 2 weeks on. And if I can get to it daily, I'll do it daily. But if not, it'll at least be every Friday. I'll get everything caught up on Blog Talk Radio. So I'm using Blog Talk Radio as a podcast aggregator also, which is, they're fine with that. I'm fine with that. It's free. I have a lot of listeners that are still on there. My hits on the DanClementsShow.com continue to keep climbing, and hopefully that'll turn into more subscribers on YouTube someday. If you're watching the show, and I keep this up below, I do have to get rid of one thing, And let me do that now. I keep forgetting about this. VidMe is no longer in business. It was another YouTube type video platform, but they were totally going on donations and no advertising whatsoever. And that's okay for certain folks, but if you're trying to entice the YouTube community over there on that platform, it was never going to work on straight donations. It wasn't. So I don't know if they're going to reorganize or what, but eventually I'm going to be putting up the link to BitChute, where I'm going to start putting all my short videos, the rebuttal videos I'm starting to make. I have one in the queue to finish up, and I have one that I got to shoot today, which will be going up later on today or first thing tomorrow on Saturday. So I think I have everything caught up enough to where I can start at least trying to do 1 to 2 short videos every day and get those loaded up to the internet. I'm finding out more and more the short videos are what people watch. They don't watch the full live feeds most of the time, and that's okay, but I still like to put out the live feeds because there are some people out there that do watch the whole thing. So that's one of the reasons why I continue to do that. Now, today's show on Free-for-All-Friday, I'm asking the question, has capitalism failed in America? And the reason why I'm asking this, as most of the time my ideas for shows comes from discussions I'm having on social media, especially on Facebook. And it never fails. Every time I bring up regulations are oppressive, regulations do nothing but create crony capitalism and distorts markets, the whole nine, free markets, the whole 9 yards. I got a hold of this guy on Facebook. He was a friend of a friend who was commenting on something I said about net neutrality. And this guy is a full-blown democratic socialist. He thinks there's a difference between democratic socialism and regular old-fashioned socialism. But he would never explain. I'd ask him to explain it, and all he kept coming back to, and this is the funny part about me being on social media, he knows through interactions, we've had interactions before, he knows I'm not college educated. And so, again, here's one of these folks who does have a college degree, younger millennial, that since I don't have a college degree, I'm not smart enough to know what's good enough for me. Or for you, for that matter. I'm not smart enough to even be able to comment on the news. And that's a problem, folks. That's a real problem. Because if we lived by that ideology, there would be very few folks out there in the world that knew anything because they didn't go to college. And some of the smartest, wisest folks I've ever met were not college educated. I'm not saying a college education doesn't benefit. If you listen to this show long enough, you know darn well I don't believe that. If you want to go to college, fine. It just wasn't for me. And ever since the advent of the internet, and I actually discovered it and was using it before I had a computer at home. I was going to the local library and using their computer to figure out how to use a computer, how to even use a browser, how to do a search. Because I didn't know any of these things. And then in 1995, I got my first computer, which is way before some of these millennials who are commenting and saying derogatory things against me, like, well, you're an idiot because you don't have a college education. And they don't come out, some of them don't come out and say that, but just their implications and just how they talk down to me is proof enough for me that they think that I'm an idiot because I don't have an education. And I keep telling them I'm a rogue scholar, and they don't even, folks, these college-educated folks don't even get to play on words that I use for that. And Dave, it's R-O-G-U-E, okay, rogue scholar. And they don't even get to play on words. I wasn't even going to explain to this guy. He had me, not twisted and knots, but, I was responding to questions he had, and that happened to come up as one of them, rogue scholar, just ditzing that, all across the board on the chat we were having. And like I said, I wasn't even going to explain it to him. I've explained it to you guys enough. It's a play on words because we've had there's people out there called Rhodes Scholars. Okay, and that's an actual term. I think it's is it ROADH something? I'll look it up here. I don't want to. RHODES Scholar. Rhodes Scholarship. The Rhodes Scholarship, named after Cecil John Rhodes, is an international postgraduate award for selected foreign students to study at the University of Oxford. It is widely regarded as the most prestigious scholarship in the world. Okay, it's widely regarded as that, all right? Yeah, RHODES. Thanks, Dave. But when you got guys like Bill Clinton that actually is a Rhodes Scholar, you have to question that. But we're not going to go down that alley too far. And again, I don't say these things about me having a lack of a college education to toot my own horn. That's the last thing I do. What I'm trying to get across to folks is you can do research. Especially if you have the internet, you can go to your DuckDuckGo, a search engine like I do, and you can research these things. And in today's episode, Has Capitalism Failed in America? I have, and this isn't the first time, but I have a lot of opposition or a lot of articles and opinions of where these folks truly believe that capitalism has failed. And we're going to read some of them. We're going to go through. This show might end up being closer to 2 hours a day. I'm not sure, because this will be my last broadcast till after Christmas. So, it might go a little bit longer than it normally does. But I think it's important for us to understand this, because we need to ask this question. I don't think this question is being asked enough. Has capitalism failed in America? Most of the time, when you listen to the Lamestream media or intellectuals out there, they want to preach to you the failures of capitalism. Capitalism and free market capitalism has failed us. And they want to preach it to you, but they never put it as a question where they want to sit down and have a discussion with you. And this is what I want to try to do today. I want to try to have a discussion about this, because we've talked about the differences between capitalism or free market capitalism and socialism, communism, what these systems are. And we sort of went over those in the past. But because of this conversation I had on Facebook yesterday, last night, and into this morning, not the whole time, I got off, went to bed, and when I finished prepping for the show here, I was going back over a couple things and reading some more comments. It amazes me how many millennials out there are buying into the propaganda that is socialism. And they're buying into the propaganda that capitalism has failed. Wherever capitalism has been introduced, or free markets, or however you want to put it, a lot of times I'll string all three words together, free market capitalism, it's been an abject failure according to these intellectuals. And so I think we need to drill down and look and see if it's a problem with capitalism, or is the problem somewhere else and it's not a problem with capitalism. And this is something that you don't hear a lot from the Lamestream media. They don't, for whatever reason, they don't want to express this. They don't want people to know about it. At least that's what it seems to me. It's almost a concerted effort to bury the truth and the facts about capitalism. So on today's show, we're going to tackle this a little bit differently than I normally do. We're actually going to go over and talk about some of the articles that, where they think that capitalism has failed. I have some in here. Capitalism simply isn't working, and here's the reason why, by Will Hutton. It's an opinion piece from The Guardian, posted back in April of 2014. Free Market Capitalism, Our Broken System, and it's by a website called Our Broken System. It's another opinion piece. We have 5 Reasons Capitalism Has Failed by Bob Burnett, the smirking chimp, over at AltNet, posted back in 2011. And then there's this ListVerse, and it's a website that they have these like top 10, top 5 lists. And they have 2 different lists on there. One, Top 10 Reasons Why Capitalism Sucks, by Johan Sarundel, and Top 10 Top 10 Greatest Benefits of Capitalism by Jed and Rachel Nuno over at ListVerse. And then some of these I'm just going to skim through, and other ones I'm going to get more in depth, but the one I'm going to get to at the end is the piece to the resistance. And I'm not going to give the name of it now, but it's an economic professor over at Harvard, Edward L. Glaser, and I'm using that piece. It's one of the ones I found, and I've read this piece before, and it really lays open the argument, sort of just unpacks everything in this argument, and actually looks to see if it is a failure of free market capitalism, or if the failure belongs, or if the failure is caused by something else. Dave wrote in here, he says, I read the parable of the broken window a little while ago. Lame. If he had bought shoes, he wouldn't have had the money to fix his window. It goes both ways. And that is out of the book called The Law by, I got it on my Kindle, and my Kindle happens to be downstairs, by Frederick Bastiat, called The Law. And I think Dave puts it out there, but I think it's a little more complicated than what Dave does put out there. If the person hadn't broke the window, he'd had the parable of the story is if the window hadn't been broken, then that capital that he had could have been spent on something else other than repairing the window, because the window is considered a durable goods. You put a window in there. I mean, we have. I've been in houses when I was plumbing, and even in this house, we have some window panes in this house that's 50, 60 years old. So it's considered a durable good unless there's actions placed upon it that breaks it. And so if those hoodlums and vandals didn't break the windows, he could have spent that capital on something else other than the window. So that's sort of the parable of that story. And that's a good read. Frederick Bastiat is a good read as far as for economics. He was a French philosopher, and around the time of our founding, maybe a little bit, I think it was a little bit before, or a little after. I got to get I don't know what the dates are. I don't have the book sitting in front of me, but he lays out a lot of different cases for the economy and what happens when the government gets involved in the economy. Like the candlestick maker is my favorite one. The candlestick makers are trying to go to the government to have them shut out or block out the sun so they can continue to sell candles for even daytime use. Is basically, if you take that story to its logical conclusion, that the direct competition for candlestick makers back then, besides oil lamps, was the sun. And they were going to the government to see what they can do about that. Get rid of this competition that we have in the sun. And again, there's some very good lessons to be learned from Frederick Bastiat and his book, The Law. And I haven't read through the whole thing. I'm about half or 3/4 of the way through. I read it for a while, and then I sit and contemplate on what I've read because it's so in depth on some things, and then I go back to it and continue my reading in that. So we're going to look at this question: has capitalism failed in America today? Now, if you've listened to the show long enough, you know my answer to this already. But if you haven't, I'm going to reserve this for a later time and a later date. Okay. Oh, let's see here what I want to do. Not sure which commercial. I'm also getting some more affiliate marketers, and I have to get them set up on here. Listen, folks, I know the weekend's already upon us, and especially it's Christmas weekend. A lot of people are going to be traveling today and out of town, so they're not really thinking about this, about fixing things. But it might be in the back of their minds as they're traveling down the road that, doggone it, I need a part for that snowblower. Or I need a part for my riding tractor with the snowplow on the front before it gets too snowy out or before it snows, and I got to get it fixed. But I don't know where to get it. Well, never fear, because Sears is here. Sears Parts Direct is an affiliate marketer of mine on the DanClementShow.com show notes page. And if you go to the show notes page and you click on the Sears Parts Direct widget and put the information you need, a lot of times you need the serial number, the model, definitely the model number and the make. You put that in there and it'll give you expanded views of parts. You can zero in on the parts you need. You can order it. And if you put in the offer code that you'll find at the danclemenshow.com on the widget, you'll save 10% off your lawnmower equipment or lawn or power equipment parts or your appliance parts, whatever you're trying to fix. You'll save 10%, and that normally, if not more than, covers the shipping and handling for the part that you're going to get. So what are you waiting for? You know, don't let that snow blower or that lawn tractor, the snow plow, sit there broke when you could have got parts for it and could have fixed it before the major snowstorm hit, and then you're wondering what happened. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly. But while he thought about these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. So this is talking about the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. And this is a fulfillment of prophecy out of the Old Testament. Today's quote meal actually comes from Benjamin Franklin, and I like this one a lot. How many observe Christ's birthday? How few his precepts? 'Tis easier to keep holidays than commandments. Think about that, folks. 'Tis easier to keep holidays than commandments. And today's short Bible lesson comes from Al Shannon over Biblical Proof. It was posted up on the 14th of this month. Stopping the mouths of false teachers. Really good article. He digs into this a little bit, and it's a really thought-provoking article, because he's not only talking about false teachers when it comes to God's word and the gospel, and what you need to know to be saved and be a disciple of Christ and everything that entails being a Christian. But when I see this stopping the mouth of false teachers, like I said, I look at the world through my Christian worldview. My Christian walk with God informs the rest of my life. Okay? And there are false teachers everywhere, not only in Christianity. There's false teachers in just about any profession you want to get into. Any philosophy you want to talk about, whether it's economic or political or, even religious philosophy, going back to the Bible and that. So we have false teachers all around us. We have people that are bearing false witness, in other words, around us all the time. And this is a good article to go over. It's a real thought-provoking article when it comes to stopping the mouths of false teachers. And the only way I know to do that is to contend earnestly for the faith, as far as Scripture goes. As Jude says, contend earnestly for the faith. And the same way out here in the real world, if you want to say that, out in the world, you got to contend earnestly for the truth. You have to know what the truth is, and if you don't know what it is, you need to find out. And once you find out what the truth is, you need to hold on to it like it's a precious diamond and never let it go. And you need to study on that truth, and you need to understand what are some of the attacks against that truth, why some people would call what you believe in a falsehood. And you need to expose yourself to that. If you're in an echo chamber, you need to come out of that echo chamber and be exposed to counterpoints of views to what you are holding. And only then can we know if what we're really believing is the truth, or if it was a lie and we need to discard it. And that is the flip side. The flip side of that is there are too many people in the world, once you show them the truth of a matter, they don't want to leave the comfort of their lie. Their lie is easier for them to deal with than the truth, because most of the time the truth asks you to take an action. Or even stronger than that, a lot of times the truth demands you take an action if you're going to hold fast to that truth. And one of those actions is defend the truth. Seek it out, find it, defend it. And that's what we try to do on this program at the Dan Clemens Show. We try to do this. And sometimes I spectacularly fail, but other times I think I'm pretty good at defending the truth and the facts as I've found them so far. And this is, and like I said, I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody by using some of these articles that, capitalism simply isn't working. Because I want to see I need to know what people are thinking. Just like this young man that I was talking to on Facebook. He thinks there's a difference between old-fashioned Soviet-style authoritarian socialism and democratic socialism. And I told him, I said, there's not a hill of, just not a hill of beans of difference between the two. There just is not. I said, one, you have government thugs that take power by force and then force their socialism on the masses. And I said the other way is people vote these thugs into office and want them to impose socialism on everybody. But the end result's still the same. You still come away with socialism. And this young man, I feel sorry for him in some ways because he's been indoctrinated in this theory and this thought that socialism, especially democratic socialism, is okay because we voted for it. And I have an article here that I want to share with you. It's about Venezuela. Let me see here. Let me get everything set up here for you here. It's Venezuela is democratic socialism in action. And this is the most perfect, modern example of democratic socialism because Hugo Chavez, the predecessor to President Nicolas Maduro, was voted into office, and he was voted in the office with the promises of him taking care of folks socially. Not only just being a safety net, just because of the wealth of the oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And it was a wealthy country, but that was the only thing it really had wealth in was its oil. And they were taking all this oil money and they were literally just robbing the oil companies, enriching themselves, and giving just enough to the people to keep them comfortable so they wouldn't revolt. But then when oil prices dropped, and I'm not saying anything that can't be researched or known here, but when oil prices really dropped, they weren't able to afford their social, quote-unquote, safety net anymore. Giving food stamps and housing and everything to everybody who wanted it, whether they deserved it or not, or whether they needed it or not. And then the country really started getting in trouble. And instead of reversing their policies, and it's called austerity, folks, and austerity is not a bad word, but instead of reversing their policies, they dug in and entrenched themselves. And this is an article by the Washington Examiner. It's an opinion piece posted on May 18th, 2016. A tyrant becomes most dangerous when he reaches the end of his rope. This is where Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro now finds himself. On Monday, he placed Venezuela under a state of exception and economic emergency due to international and national threats against our fatherland. Specifically, he warned of a coup against himself orchestrated by the United States government. This guy's paranoid. This guy is a paranoid maniac. Okay? We don't have to do anything. All the United States has to do is step back and let things happen naturally like they're going to anyway. We don't have to nudge them along. We don't have to do anything for his downfall. The country, his own citizens are going to take care of it for him eventually. And they're going to take care of the government eventually. And hopefully some folks up there are, some right-thinking folks, will say this democratic socialism didn't work. Why don't we try some free market capitalism and go that way and see what happens? And the only problem with that, folks, is for a while it works, and then we forget to teach the next generation the virtues of capitalism and free market, okay? On Tuesday, a state-funded news service reported his threat to dissolve the national legislature. which the opposition party won in a landslide election last December. The National Assembly has lost political validity, Maduro told reporters. It's a matter of time before it disappears. So as opposition, those that didn't like the way the country was going, they won in the assembly, and this is history to us now, but he just totally disregarded those results. That's what dictators do. And I bet you $1 to the dozen donuts that he's not starving like the rest of his population starving. Most dictators and those that agree with him that are in political power don't suffer like the people do, okay? But Maduro is probably beyond saving. At this point, only 15% of his fellow citizens approve of his government. Political protests roil the streets, and normally law-abiding citizens have resorted to looting to get their hands on basic necessities. The government has responded with force. And Ben Shapiro, I was watching his program on YouTube this morning. I was eating my breakfast. He showed an article. There's like 8,000, more than 8,000 people has died since Maduro has taken power. And we're not talking about just natural cause deaths. We're talking about, I shouldn't say died, they were killed. They're either killed by the government, and government-caused famine is killing people. And Maduro and his government is responsible for these deaths, some over 8,000. And the hardest hit ones there are newborn babies. You know, they had the Zika virus crisis down there, plus all these newborn babies being born, and they can't buy formula. This story of this one mother, she was infected with Zika, so she couldn't breastfeed her child, and the child eventually died. They were trying to give it other supplements. They couldn't get formula because what was it? Ben Shapiro was saying in an article it was 2 times the amount of what the husband could bring home in a week. You know, that's how much the formula was, and it wouldn't last long. And hospitals didn't even have formula. So this country is imploding. Venezuela is imploding, and I'm not going to read down through the whole article here, but they're imploding, and the social democrats in the United States don't see that as an example of a failure of social or democratic socialism. And it happens to be the perfect example. And that's what they want. That's why they all flocked to Bernie. Bernie was going to give away the government store, in other words, to these millennials, and that's what they were looking for. They were looking for the handout. They weren't looking for a hand up. They were looking for a handout. And they thought it sounded pretty good to them. They wouldn't have to work for this. They wouldn't have to work the rest of their lives to pay off their student loans. Especially, you know, when they got degrees that were worthless, that they couldn't make a living off of. You know, to me, that's just going to college to go to college. If you're not going to make a living off of what you went to college for, you know, to support you and your family and stuff like that. To me, that's a worthless degree. Some people might disagree with me on that, and that's okay. We can have that difference of opinion there, but don't blow smoke in my face and try to tell me there's a forest fire going on when it comes to how democratic socialism or socialism in general is a failure every place it's implemented. Because sooner or later, in Venezuela, their inflation's over 2,000% or 3,000%, something like that. And sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. In order to have all these social programs that democratic socialists want, you have to have money that you can take away, you can redistribute from the producers. And eventually, the producers are going to do a couple things. Either they're going to move their operations out of that country or state, as in the United States here. They're going to move to a friendlier state, just like businesses in California are moving to Texas because of the tax burden's far less than it is in California. And the same way with Venezuela, a lot of the prominent businessmen moved out of there and took their businesses with them and took their prosperity because they were tired of being robbed by the government. Or they stayed because they loved the country so much, and they just ended up having to close the doors because, again, the government robbed their wealth in order to put out a social safety net for everybody. That really, it amazes me how, and this probably comes from the liberal arts degrees, you know, as far as the leftists and the Democrats in this country, how they can come up with these innocuous titles that makes it sound so good, like net neutrality. Those net neutrality regulations, the Title II utility regulations net, it sounds so good that we're going to keep the net open and free. And yet they're actually opening up the door for corruption, bribery, the whole 9 yards, if we'd have left net neutrality in place. And again, we're a week and a day in to net neutrality, and I'm still broadcasting on the internet. My internet connection's working good. I know Dave's is because he's chatting in the chat room. So we're still good. And we're today, breaking news today, I thought he was going to wait till he got on vacation somewhere, but One American News Network is reporting that Donald Trump is signs a historic tax bill this morning. So it's a done deal, folks. It's a done deal, and people are losing their minds. And the other story that I was sort of, while I was eating breakfast, I was going over the Lamestream media channels, and just real quick here. Let me get over here. The fake Trump dossier. Author confesses to using unverified information. This is posted today from the newsroom there at One American News Network. Court documents reveal that fake Trump dossier was based on unreliable information. Former British spy Christopher Steele confessed in court the dossier was based on, quote, limited intelligence and did not represent verified facts. Really? You mean we spent $5 million plus taxpayer dollars on the Mueller Russia collusion investigation into Trump, and it was based off this dossier, the Infusion GPS dossier, that was not verified facts. So we've just wasted over 5 million American taxpayer dollars, and this was being talked about over a year ago, that this was not accurate. This dossier was not accurate, was not based in truth. And now in the court comes out, I lied. And I'm still seeing things from my antagonists on Facebook that are still putting up that, hey, we got to indict President Trump on this Russian collusion. We just got to get it done. We got to get it done. What Russian collusion? Matter of fact, I don't have them up here. Just real quick, a side note here talking about this. Mueller's investigation is actually requesting documents from Jill Stein's campaign, emails and stuff like that. And they also brought up about Uranium One, which is Hillary's. That's around Hillary's neck, not around Trump's. The only collusion that they've been finding or investigating now is outside of Trump. So again, I don't mean to laugh, but folks, when it's been told from the beginning almost by investigative journalists outside of the lamestream media that want to do their job right, like, we're not talking about like the New York Times or the Washington Compost. We're talking about the Washington Examiner, the Washington Times, that they really were drilling down and trying to find out if this dossier was true. And they were hitting roadblocks and couldn't verify anything on that. And they come to the conclusion that there's something hokey going on here and it needs to be investigated more. And yet all we keep hearing from the lamestream media is Trump, collusion with Russia. That's all we've been hearing. And the more they dig into it and waste taxpayer dollars doing it, by the way, the more they're not finding any collusion with Donald Trump, period. And they keep pointing to Michael Flynn. Well, Michael Flynn, all he did was lie to the FBI. He was caught in a lie, which really doesn't reflect on Donald Trump, according to everything I've read about it. But I just want to get off that. I just thought that, some breaking news here this morning about that. So our tax cuts are in place, and so the world should be ending. I'm looking out the window. Now, it looks like it hasn't ended yet, but according to the Democrats, the world's going to come to an end because of this tax bill. I get enjoyment. My wife says, "Why do you like watching politics?" And I says, "Because it's so much political theater. You got these Democrats out there; their heads are spinning around like the girl in The Exorcist. And just the sky's falling, and when it doesn't, you never hear any retractions. Well, I was wrong. You know, I maybe overstated. You never hear any of that. Okay, not a word of that, and that tickles me to see. It does. It tickles me. All right, now let's get into some of these articles here. Let me see here. Capitalism simply isn't working, and here are the reasons why. And this is by Will Hutton. And he posted this back on April 12th in 2014 in The Guardian. Now, that's a British news service over there. Suddenly, there's a new economist making waves, and he's not on the right. At the conferences of the Institute for New Economic Thinking in Toronto last week, Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in the 21st Century, got at least one mention at every session I attended. You have to go back to the 1970s and Milton Friedman for a single economist who to have had such an impact. Now, Thomas Piketty, we're not going to get into this, and if you trust me when I tell you, from an Austrian economic standpoint, Thomas Piketty and his books have been totally debunked. He is totally just off course with what his thoughts on this. Okay. Like Friedman, Piketty is a man for the times, for 1970s anxieties about inflation, subsidies, today's concerns about the emergence of the plutocratic rich and their impact on economy and society. Piketty is in no doubt, as he indicates in an interview in today's Observer New Review, that the current level of rising wealth inequality set to grow still further now imperils the very future of capitalism, and he has proved it. Now, again, this is one of these 10-headed monsters that come up all the time about this wealth inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor. And they make it sound like the rich are stealing from those who don't make as much as them to get to where they're at. And the issue, and I skimmed over this article earlier, the biggest issue is they never deal with wealth mobility. With wealth mobility. And what that means is at any given time, there's just as many people that go into the top earners as come out of the top earners. It's an ever revolving door. And they never ever talk about that. They just talk about this gap, this widening gap. And a lot of people don't even think about it because to me it's a non-starter, but we'll let the article play out here today. It is a startling thesis and one of extraordinary unwelcome to those who think capitalism and inequality need each other. Capitalism requires inequality of wealth, runs this right of center argument to stimulate risk-taking and effort. Governments trying to stem it with taxes on wealth, capital, inheritance, and property kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Thus Messrs. Cameron and Osborne faithfully champion lower inheritance taxes, refuse to reshape the council tax, and boast about the business-friendly low capital gains and corporation tax regimes. We're talking about over in the UK here, folks. Piketty deploys 200 years of data to prove them wrong. Capital, he argues, is blind. Once it returns, investing in anything from buy-to-let property to new car factory exceeds the real growth of wages and output, as historically they've always been done, excepting for periods such as 1910 to 1950. Then inevitably the stock of capital will rise disproportionately faster within the overall pattern of output. Wealth inequality raises exponentially. And again, Piketty argues that the wealth inequality is something to be feared, or something, this is why capitalism isn't working. And I can honestly say, except for, up until I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, that me and my wife had always done better or the same than we always have. With a few setbacks, a lot of those few setbacks were either due to health or things outside of our control. But we've always managed to sort of claw our way back, as it were, and get on top of things and keep going. And most people do this. And we never think about the inequality. I never think about how that millionaire stole money from me to get to where they're at. As a worker, and this is the other thing about wealth inequality, is I had this guy on Twitter just trying to hammer me on this, that corporations exploit their employees. And I said, do tell, how do they exploit their employees? When I work for somebody, I settle on a wage or a salary. The last job I had was an hourly wage, and I was making well above $16 an hour. I was making over $17 an hour before I was diagnosed and couldn't work anymore because of the fibromyalgia. And that was due to a skill set, and that's what I agreed to work for this employer. Tell me how I was exploited. I got, I accumulated because of on-time performance and things like that. I accumulated personal days. I was given vacation days every year, paid vacation days every year. I had paid medical. I had a life insurance policy. And there might have been a couple other benefits. Oh, yeah, I got certificates, like safety certificates to buy safety shoes to wear in the plant. So I didn't have to pay for my safety shoes. You know, a lot of benefits. So tell me how I was exploited in that. If I agree to work for a company and they're coming through with the agreed upon, the contract as it were, if they come through with that, again, how am I exploited? How are you exploited? And they never explain this. Matter of fact, a lot of the folks I get in discussions with, when I ask them that question, they can't explain it other than, well, this guy's making, you know, this CEO's making $5 million a year. Okay, can you do his job? I know I couldn't. Can you do his job? Very few people can. And if you're complaining about the CEO that is making $5 million a year, working in a free market system, not exploiting his employees or anything, doing everything by the book, and still being profitable, I never hear people complain about actors and actresses and singers that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I never hear them complaining about that. There's some wealth inequality there if you want to point that out, but they never do. It's always corporations, it's always business. These evil entrepreneurs out there, these evil CEOs, how dare they give, like AT&T, how dare they give $1,000 to, you know, hundreds of thousands of employees, or however many. I had the article on the show yesterday. Boeing's doing the same thing. AT&T's doing the same thing. Wells Fargo, another big bank in Ohio, they're giving out bonuses now. And they're not giving them out to just the upper management. They're giving them out to thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. So tell me how they're being exploited. Dave's poking fun at me where I live. Inequality of wealth in Europe and the U.S. is broadly twice the inequality of income. The top 10% have between 60 and 70% of wealth, but merely 20 to 35% of all income. But this concentration of wealth is already at pre-First World War levels and heading back to those of the late 19th century, when the luck of who might expect to inherit what was the dominant element in economic and social life. There is an irritative interaction between wealth and income. Ultimately, great wealth adds unearned rentier income to earned income, further ratcheting up the inequality process. Because they have money, they put their money to work, which earns them more money. That's a bad thing. How dare they do that? So the government's going to step in and take some of their wealth so they're not as wealthy, so they can be more equal with folks that aren't as lucky as they are. I don't know too many entrepreneurs that feel like they're lucky, other than they feel blessed or lucky that they were born in the United States, that we have relative freedom here in the United States, relatively speaking, you know, compared to some of the government regulations that we have to go through. But most entrepreneurs will tell you they work darn hard for what they got. And it's stupid. If you earn money, why don't you put that to work? And I'm telling you right now, a lot of my family and friends who talk about this wealth inequality that are just bashing businesses all the time. Every one of them I know have a 401k. How dare they have a 401k? You mean they're actually making money off of money? The rentier? They're actually putting money to work. They're investing it for their retirement. How dare you? That's wealth inequality to someone that doesn't have a 401k. Are you willing to give that 401k up for those people? And most of the time you talk to the liberals and the social democrats out there, they're not willing to give up what they have, but they want somebody else to give up what they have. And again, someone being rich doesn't take away from me. They don't steal from me to do that. They've worked hard. And I'm a firm believer in this. We make our own luck, our own breaks in life. We really do. But you only do that by working hard. So he goes on down through there. He just talks, and I just wanted to give you the flavor of this article, why capitalism isn't working. And they keep bringing out this tired old argument about wealth inequality. And one of the things you have to realize with socialists and Democrats, or democratic socialists, who a lot of Democrats in this country are democratic socialists, what they fail to see is, like in America, and this is the way we should always look at everything. We all should have a level playing field, which means we all should be equal at the starting line. But that's the only equality we're guaranteed. And it should not be based on any arbitrary characteristic that we might have, our skin color, our gender, our looks, our age, or anything like that. It should be on merit and merit alone. And if somebody gets down the field further and faster than I do, it's not that they delayed me or halted me or slowed me up. It's that they had more drive and more determination to do what they're doing. It's as simple as that. And what are you going to do? Hold them back? You're going to put weights on their feet so they can't go through the race in life faster than somebody else? I say God bless them. If they have that intuition and that drive and that ability to make a living and possibly put money back or create a corporation or something like that and employ thousands of employees, I say God bless them. As long as they didn't cheat to do it, as long as they didn't steal from somebody to do it. And this is the argument that socialists always bring up. This is why there's so many millennials and the next generation after them are so dead set against capitalism, because they're not taught the truth about capitalism. All they hear is these lies and these falsehoods that are being perpetrated. And this one here about wealth inequality is so easy to debunk. It's like fall off the log easy, yet people will take it and swallow it hook, line, and sinker, and won't even stop to think about that it doesn't matter about the inequality. It just matters where they started at and if they cheated to get there. If they cheated to get there, like Bernie Madoff, he cheated to get the wealth he had. He defrauded people, and he's cooling his heels in federal prison now, possibly for the rest of his life, because he defrauded people to do that. Now, if he had to defraud people and it was an actual investment scheme that he set up, I use scheme in the term of an actual lawful working investment, not a Ponzi scheme like he set up, and he made people money and he got wealthy off that, that's a totally different story. If he did it right, he wasn't defrauding people, he wasn't lying to people about it, anything like that, that's a totally different story. And we're being taught in this country that if, and this is an example Ben Shapiro gave, if our neighbor was well-to-do and one day he drove up and parked a Lamborghini in his driveway, how many of us would be jealous of that? How many of us would covet that Lamborghini? I would try not to covet the Lamborghini. I wouldn't be jealous of him as long as you let me drive it once. Or at least let me look under the hood to see how it's built, right? Let me touch the Lamborghini. I say that jokingly. I'm not going to be mad because somebody else does better than I do. I have friends and neighbors who they're not totally well-to-do, but they're well off, and they have a lot of the friends and neighbors I know that are middle class, and they have expendable capital, that extra capital or cash they can spend. They own rental units. They invested their money, and they reap a profit off the rents that they charge for their rental units. and they do very well. They're not living high on the hog, but they don't live paycheck to paycheck, and they live very well. They go vacations where they want to go. And I don't begrudge them that a bit. Not one iota do I begrudge them. And is there a wealth inequality between the two of us? I wouldn't look at it as an inequality. Is there a difference in our levels of wealth? Absolutely. But I know, like one of our next door neighbors and a friend I go with church, or a couple of them I know that have rental units, I know they didn't steal from me. They didn't steal from their tenants. They didn't steal from any of their friends to get where they're at. They did it honestly and by the book. So this argument with wealth inequality is it's a straw man argument that is designed to stir up emotions in people. It really is. And it's a shame that, in this day and age, in research and everything, that people don't understand it. Even when you try to teach them the truth about it, they still don't understand it. They've been indoctrinated so much that employers exploit the employees, and that's a Marxist. That's right out of the Marxist manifesto, and government has to step in and take care of this exploitation, which it really isn't going on. It is not. Matter of fact, one of the articles, I don't know if we'll get to it. In the article, I was reading through it. One of the articles about wealth inequality is about how these companies, these CEOs and everything, or these big multinational corporations, are actually exploiting cheap labor over in other countries. And they say it's a bad thing. They want to pull these companies out of these countries, but they never answer the question, what are the men, women, and children going to do? What are they going to do in these countries if they don't have those jobs? They never talk about that. Matter of fact, there was a FEE had an article I think I shared last spring where this economist went around talking in third world countries and was talking to folks that were in factories and stuff like that, and asked them a simple question, especially in the more warmer climates. He said, would you rather have an air conditioner here at work, or would you rather have an extra so much an hour? And almost to a person, not quite every last one of them, but almost to a person, the overwhelming vast majority said they'd rather have more money in their pocket than they would an air conditioner at work to make their work environment more comfortable. And that surprised him. He thought they would go for the comfort. And they didn't. And there's example after example after example of that, where folks make these economic decisions in their lives. And if it wasn't for some of these multinationals going over and hiring, not exploiting, but hiring these folks at the prevailing wage there, and giving these people an opportunity to move up mobily, move upwards in society, financially wise, again, then it would be just... I had something pop up on my screen over there. I didn't like that. And again, who are we to say what these people should be working for? And if the wages wasn't enough, they wouldn't work for it. And then again, you ask the question that never gets answered. They avoid us like a plague. What are these people going to do if these multinationals pull out? And this is the one here. Is this the one here? Well, anyway, this one here is Free Market Capitalism, Our Broken System. And this is an opinion piece by this website, Our Broken System. I couldn't find a name that was to it, but I thought it was kind of interesting, the first few opening paragraphs. He said, over recent years, we have been led to believe that capitalism is the only viable economic model, and anyone who disagrees is at best deluded, and at worst, a red who wants to drag us back to an era of old-style socialism, or worse still, communism. This is the philosophy of Tina. There is no alternative, and the belief that even if capitalism isn't perfect, we must stick with it because everything else is worse. And so you see where this person's coming from in this opinion piece, okay? And the problem with a lot of these opinion pieces is that they don't deal in history. They don't deal in verifiable, fact-filled history about socialism, communism, and capitalism, okay? There is, however, a lie put about by those who are benefiting from the current system. Capitalism can take many forms, And the one we live under now is the free market unregulated model, also called neoliberalism, which basically states that if governments interfere as little as possible and the markets are allowed free rein to control everything, then the quest for profit will drive economic growth, while competition will ensure that prices are low, service is good, and the customer will be the beneficiary. Also, although inevitably those at the top will get very rich, the theory is that the wealth will filter down to everyone through job creation and spending. Now, this person, whoever it was, okay, they describe what free market capitalism is. And they're fooling themselves if we have this in abundance here in the United States. So I'm not saying that we don't have, and we're not exercising free market capitalism principles. How many grocery stores you got? How many varieties of items do you have in those grocery stores? Department stores, gasoline stations, tire stores, shoe stores, clothing stores, department stores, specialty item stores, toy stores for the kids. And the list, automobiles, how many automobile, different manufacturers, different styles, different types, different body makes, all that kind of stuff. How many choices do you have in the market? Those are free market principles. We do have that, but we also have a lot of regulations on top of those that actually add to the cost. Because there's a cost of regulation, and businesses do not pay that. They always pass that on to the consumer. And taxes on businesses, they never pay those. They figure that in the cost of doing business. There's a formula, a mathematical formula you can use to figure that out. And so the consumer always pays. Pretty much the consumer gets it in the teeth every time because of regulations. Again, because corporations do not pay them. It's a pass-through, okay? Unfortunately, this theory is flawed because what has actually happened over time is that an insidious form of corruption has taken hold, where those clever or lucky enough to work their way to the top are able to play the system to enrich themselves, while those at the bottom are left stranded and forced to live in ever greater levels of poverty, or as the government now likes to call it, austerity. What has gone wrong? Simply this: the people who run society, whether the government or the captains of industry, are able to make all the rules, both for themselves and for everyone else. Far from being in competition with each other, they're actually all competitors who operate as a sort of cartel where with nudges and winks, they help each other to get richer at society's expense. What this person in this opinion piece is talking about is they are lumping crony capitalism and saying it's the same thing as free market capitalism. They got the definition right in the paragraph before, a couple paragraphs up there, but now they lump, and this is where we're at in our education system today, and this is where millennials are at, and they've been indoctrinated very well into this ideology that all corporations, all companies participate in crony capitalism, which means they go to the government and they get regulations and laws put in place to benefit them at the expense of their competitors and actually stifle competition, which when that competition is stifled, then there isn't as much innovation as there would be, and the consumers are the ones that are left holding the bag. They're the ones that are left out of the whole thing. There is a difference, and you need to make a distinction between both of these. Crony capitalism has nothing to do with capitalism. It is a bastardization of capitalism and free market capitalism. Free market capitalism, these so-called captains of industries understand that the only power that they have is delivering and fixing a pain point that consumers might have. I need a vehicle to go to point A to point B. There's somebody out there that has what you need to take care of what's called an economic pain point that you might have. I don't have any shoes. I need to buy a pair of shoes. I don't have clothes. I need to buy clothes. I need a place to live. So you either need to buy a house or rent a house. You see how it all goes. It's a give and take. And for the most part, entrepreneurs fill a need that people have. And they know most. Because when you're talking crony capitalism, you're talking about a very few corporations that actually participate in crony capitalism. And some of the corporations that actually participate in crony capitalism are the ISPs that net neutrality was never designed to take care of. Matter of fact, net neutrality, if it was left in place, a Title II utility with ISPs, would have made the situation worse, not better. Now with the Title II out of the way, competition can come in and force some of these companies to do what they're supposed to be doing instead of going to the government and getting regulations and getting monopolies on the local level through the local bureaucracies. Then they're forced to compete on a level playing field. And they don't like that. Companies do. A fellow elder of mine was a business owner, and he did not like competition. He wished he could eliminate the competition, not physically, but through regulation and that, because he felt that competition was a detriment to his business. And I looked at him and I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Just having that idea in your mind that competition should make you better, want to service your customers," and he felt that he did, and he did. He really took care of. He was very Christian-like in his business, and he gave everybody a fair deal and all that kind of stuff. And I said, "You take care of your customers and stuff." I said, "The only thing competition does is to keeps you honest in dealing with that." And then we get, again in this article, we get inequality. The way capitalism is currently working has led to ever greater levels of inequality, and the financial disparity between rich and poor has grown ever wider. They always come back to this. They always get back to this issue of inequality. And if the inequality is, and this is where the difference between crony capitalism and regular capitalism, crony capitalism actually does steal from folks, actually does disadvantage. And they do, because it doesn't allow competition, which competition always makes things better, sometimes cheaper for the consumer wins. But if there is no competition and crony capitalism is in place, then the consumer is the one that take it in the teeth. And that's where we're at. And the inequality comes from, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag yet because it's down one of my last articles I want to get to, but inequality is always derived because of crony capitalism. Now, in free market capitalism, are you going to have folks that are richer than others? Yeah. But they don't look at it as an inequality. I don't look at it as an inequality. I look at this guy worked harder, or this woman's worked harder, and they've earned and they've done what they need to do honestly, without coercion on anybody, and they're well-to-do. I don't look at that as an inequality. And you see these certain terms here, the inequality, the term inequality is used in this economic indoctrination to bring up an emotional response, to invoke an emotional response in folks. So again, it didn't take long to get through this article before we got down to where it was wealth inequality. And he goes on, and again, as I explained, it's wealth inequality it's a misnomer. They're putting something out there to invoke an emotional response, so you're not thinking about it. Usually, and this is, back in my wrestling days, one of the lessons I learned in wrestling, if you get mad because your opponent's beating you, then he's won. Never ever let it get emotional. You know how to wrestle. We taught you the techniques, employ the techniques. Once you start getting emotional, you forget to use those techniques. Same way in a street fight. If you can get the other guy mad before any blows are thrown, usually you've won the fight. Because the guy's not thinking clearly. He's not thinking technically how he's going to win the fight. He just wants to smash your face in. And usually 9 times out of 10, he's lost the fight, or she's lost the fight. All right. Here's another one. Now, this is an article off the Alternet. Nothing conservative about them folks over there whatsoever. At all. This is an article by Bob Burnett. He considers himself the smirking chimp. Okay. We live in interesting times. Now, this one here was, let's see here. He wrote this on August 21st in 2011. Okay, it's not that old. We live in interesting times. The global economy is splintering. U.S. voters hate all politicians, and there's political unrest throughout the world. The root cause of this turmoil is the failure of the dominant economic paradigm, global corporate capitalism. The modern world is ruled by multinational corporations and governed by a capitalistic ideology that believes corporations are a special breed of people motivated solely by self-interest. Corporations seeks to maximize returns on capital by leveraging productivity and paying the least possible amount for taxes and labor. Corporate executives pledge allegiance to their directors and shareholders. The dominant corporate perspective is short-term. The current federal quarter or financial quarter, and the dominant corporate ethic is greed, doing whatever it takes to maximize profit. Now, that's his definition. That's Mr. Burnett's definition of corporations. Okay, the one thing you have to remember, and this is another thing that's usually lacking in these arguments, if you go look at corporation law, in corporation law, they have put in there, you have, especially if you sell stocks and you have shareholders in your business, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make that company profitable. You have a fiduciary responsibility by the law to make that company profitable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're greedy and you do whatever it takes to maximize the profit. That doing whatever it takes to maximize profit smacks of crony capitalism. Now, in my version of do whatever it takes to maximize profit is doing things legally, putting your nose to the grindstone, keeping your head down, and taking care of the people that got you where you're at. That's including customers, that's including employees, managers, and other executives. If you're not taking care of your employees, if you're not taking care of anybody that, let's say I'm a CEO of a company, if I'm not taking care of anybody downstream of me, then eventually they're going to leave for greener pastures, and then what am I stuck with? I have to hire new people, get them retrained in the system that we're running there, and if I'm inflexible in that, they won't last long either. The good corporations, the ones that prosper, are the ones that take care of people, including their employees, their customers, and they do things the right way. They don't seek out government regulations to stifle competition. They take care of competition by being the best company and putting the best product out at the best price and not exploiting people in the process, not doing things illegally in the process. And so you see a theme that's going through here with these folks that don't like capitalism. They are conflating free market capitalism with crony capitalism. And I know people don't like this term, but fascist economics. Regulations are government control of businesses. The root definition of fascism is that. Fascism doesn't own them. That's socialism. Doesn't own the means of production, but it regulates the snot out of it. But in America, we're more polite. We call it crony capitalism because fascism, Hitler ruined that word and Mussolini ruined that word for everybody. It's coming back in as far as in economic circles, trying to describe what's happening. And we participate in this in the United States when we look to crony capitalists. That's why, and folks, this is a personal boycott to me, but that's why I won't buy a new Chevy or GM product or Dodge Chrysler product. It's not going to happen because they participated in crony capitalism. They took TARP money to survive a bank, took TARP money so they wouldn't have to go through a bankruptcy. Let me put it that way. And I disagreed with it vehemently then. I still do now. And because they did that, they'll never get my business. Now, I'm only one person. I understand that. But to me, it's a point of principle. And there's other companies out there that I won't do business with either. I'm not going to get into that right now. But because of that. Now, he goes on in here. He says, 5 factors are responsible for the failure of global corporate capitalism. First, global corporations are too big. We're living in the age of corporate dinosaurs. The largest multinationals, J.P. Morgan Chase, with assets of $2 trillion, 240,000 employees and offices in 100 countries. The original dinosaurs perished because their huge bodies possessed tiny brains. Modern dinosaurs are failing because their massive bureaucracies possess minuscule hearts. Now, he does make a point here. But is it up to government to regulate their size, or is it up to competition to regulate their size? Because remember, and this is what they always go back to, and some of my antagonists on Facebook don't use this example anymore because they know I've debunked it. Standard Oil, around the turn of the last century, late 1800s, early 1900s, had in the lower 90% of the oil market in the United States of America. And because of that, the government thought, well, we need to make these anti-monopoly laws. And by the time it got the laws got through Congress and everything got to Teddy Roosevelt's desk, Standard Oil, which is owned by the Rockefellers, had dropped down to somewhere in the mid to lower 70% of the market share without the laws, without the anti-monopoly laws. What happened? Well, let's say, and I forget the exact number, but let's say they had 92% to start with when they started talking about antitrust laws. There was still 8% of the market that they didn't control. Now, my son would tell you, well, that's might as well be a monopoly, but it's not. A true monopoly has 100%. And there has never been a true monopoly in the free market system. Only governments create true monopolies like the last mile ISPs in a lot of towns. They are a true monopoly because they're the only ones that carry that product into the towns. Same way with Title II utilities. Water, gas, electricity. Okay, they're government created monopolies. So what happened between the time they started the antitrust laws and the time they got them on the books or signed into law by Teddy Roosevelt? Competition kept whittling away. They kept doing things better, delivering things cheaper, quicker, keeping their customers more satisfied than Standard Oil. And yeah, competition will take care of these dinosaurs. Where's Standard Oil today? Okay, they're not debunked. They went through some name changes, and I didn't follow the whole thing through. But they're still in business in some entity, but they don't have the market share like they used to. So what happened? What caused them to lose that market share? It was competition by other companies. And I'm not saying that they didn't participate in crony capitalism. J.P. Morgan Chase absolutely did through the housing crisis, through that whole recession. They were one of the main players in those mortgage derivatives that they were selling. Since the Reagan era, global corporations have followed the path of least resistance to profit. They've swallowed up their competitors and created monopolies which have produced huge, just humongous bureaucracies. In the short term, scale helps corporations grow profitable, but in the long term it makes them inflexible and difficult to manage. Gigantism creates a culture where workers are encouraged to take enormous risks in order to create greater job or greater profits is based upon the notion that corporation is too big to fail. This, again, everything this guy is saying here points back to crony capitalism. If a business is too big and they're not participating in corporate or crony capitalism, and they have too big a bureaucracy to survive, competitors are going to eat away at that. You know, competitors will take care of the big, just like they did Standard Oil. Competition will take care of that. We don't need government stepping in saying, well, you're just too big. And then when the government steps in saying you're too big, then the company comes around with an envelope full of cash and says, are we really too big? Are we really too big? And it opens up the door for corruption. Every time the government gets involved in the economy, it opens the door for corruption. And I know I've gone a long time without saying this in previous shows here, but one of the only ways in which government should be involved in the economy is the enforcement in the courts of contracts being made between two people. That's the only way. Second, global corporations disdain civil society. They've created a culture of organizational narcissism where workers pledge allegiance to the enterprise. Again, I'm just going to make this statement, and this is an old cowboy statement. I'm a big fan of Louis L'Amour, Zane Grey and some other Western writers. It's one of my favorite books to read, Westerns. And I call this, where workers pledge allegiance to the enterprise. I call that riding for the brand. Back in the trail days, they would hire trail hands to drive cattle from the home range to the railheads, back like the Chisholm Trail and stuff like that, back in the days before railroads were all over the country. Because they didn't want to take all the home range guys off the home range, because someone still had to stay there and work it and protect it and everything while the herd was being driven. And a lot of times they would hire a trail boss that may not be from that cattle ranch, but a trail boss that goes around the different ranches and becomes their trail boss. And what happened was, if you got hired, they'd tell you to go throw your bedroll in this wagon. And it was a wagon that came along with a chuck wagon, and it had supplies and tools and stuff in it. And once you threw your bedroll into that wagon, you were agreeing to ride for the brand. You essentially became an employee of that brand, and you defended that brand. And one of the jobs of a trail hand was to defend the cattle. Keep them safe, keep them going in the right direction, help find them water, help find them some grazing as they're going to the railhead, and protect them from, at that time, from Indians and from bandits. But you rode for the brand. And any place I've ever worked, if I'm employed by that company, I'm riding for the brand. I help protect that company. I do my best work for that company, and there's nothing wrong with that. This guy makes it sound like that's a bad thing, and it really isn't. And he goes on and talks about this whole corporate ethics thing along with the employees. And again, I don't see anything wrong with that, riding for the brand, as it were. Fourth, global corporations are ruining our natural capital. 4 of the top 10 multinational corporations are energy companies, with ExxonMobil leading the list. But there are many indicators that our oil reserves are gone. Meanwhile, other forms of natural capital have been depleted. Arable land, water, minerals, forests, fish, and so forth. Multinational corporations have treated the environment as a free resource. Now, are there some that do? Yes. But this thing that we've reached peak oil, that's been debunked for I don't know how many years now, especially with the new technologies out in shale, how they're extracting oil from shale. My sister works for Marathon Oil out in Ohio, and they have a big stake in the Bakken Formation out in the Dakotas. And they're actually accessing oil that was previously unknown. The oil sands up in Canada, Alberta, Canada, again, another one. And they keep pointing to all this. And the problem is, are there some companies and big corporations out there that are exploiting the environment? Yes, I'm not going to say there isn't. But the smart ones actually, if they're making their living off the environment, they actually take care of the environment, especially forestry. Forestry has come so far in the past 150 years. It's unreal about reforestation. Matter of fact, back when I was driving truck all over the country, especially on the East Coast, I found out a little tidbit that I thought someone was blowing smoke in my face, and they weren't. That we have more trees now on the continental U.S. than we did when the Pilgrims landed. And I've had people just tell me I'm crazy about that, but you go look up the U.S. Forest Service statistics out there. The paper mills, they found it's actually cheaper to grow their own pine trees and put them on huge plantations and big blocks of these plantations. It's cheaper for them to own those and grow their own pine trees and harvest those, that they've put pine trees on land that previously wasn't good for anything. Mainly swampy land, sandy land, stuff like that wasn't, you couldn't use it for agriculture or anything. And they started just planting pine trees in there. And guess what? They've made a great living off of that. Fisheries are being regulated. A lot of the regulations of the fisheries are coming from the states. Alaska, they only have so many days for the king crab fishing and stuff like that, because they don't want to deplete the fisheries. So again, I think he's taken a couple bad actors on the global corporation level and extrapolating that out to everybody. And then finally, fifth, global corporations have angered the world community. The world GDP is $63 trillion, but multinational corporations garner a disproportionate share, with banks accounting for an estimate $4 trillion. Bank assets are $100 trillion. Global black markets, $2 trillion. Illegal drugs account for at least $300 billion. In many parts of the world, a worker is not able to earn a living wage, have a bank account or drive a car, but always obtain drugs, sex, and weapons. And while the world may not be one big village in terms of lifestyle, it shares an image of a global or a good life that's proffered in movies, TV, and the internet. Now, again, I don't want to stumble on my piece de resistance article here, but I think most people might see where I'm actually going or heading to with all this. These angered the world community. Okay, it has, and I'll just give you a hint. Most of these world communities you're talking about has something to do with the type of governments they have, whether they're good or they're bad or corrupt. I'm gonna leave that there. Okay. So that's his 5 reasons why it's failed, and again, every one of those are conflating crony capitalism with true free market capitalism. All right. Again, here's I want to get into this other one first. Where'd it go? I didn't get it up there. Hang on a second. Copy the link location. Thought I had it up there. Sorry, folks. This is one of these list things I wanted to get to. 10 Reasons Why Capitalism Sucks. By Johan Sarundel. Now that it's Christmas, and he wrote this back on 12/27/2012 over at ListVerse. Excuse me. Now that it's Christmas season again, it seems like a good opportunity to respond to the 10 greatest benefits of capitalism, which I have also, with which I believe there are a number of problems. Firstly, it was not clear which form of capitalism was being described, so I would like to begin the list by defining the free market, which is capitalism, in its most simple form. I'll highlight the many issues which arise with a pure free market and which are undermining capitalism as we speak. A free market economy is one where all markets are unregulated by the government. There is no economic intervention or regulation by the state, with the exception of enforcing private contracts and the ownership of property. Touchdown. That is what free market capitalism is, folks. The USA, with its minimal business regulations, is one of the countries that is closest to free market capitalism today, but capitalism applies to over 80% of countries in the world, and nearly everybody worldwide is involved in the market. So the following problems apply to you. Thousands of transnational corporations exist, and many have the financial size of a small country. The common business strategy is to produce goods in developing countries where wages are cheap, then transport and sell them in rich companies like the USA where prices are high. Essentially, this is buy low, sell high on a major scale, a sure recipe for success. And one I'm sure the author would do himself if he had the opportunity, or does anyway if he is participating in that. But there's a problem with the strategy. The TNC employs in whichever country is cheapest after the cost of land, labor, and rights are combined. Note that rights such as workers' right to a reasonable wage by Western standards are a cost to the TNC. And again, they're using an arbitrary, the workers' wage throughout the world is just, it's whatever it is in that country. It's whatever the business, and I'm not saying businesses don't try to employ the cheapest labor they can get, but there's a point. There is a point at which that labor and competition causes this, where the labor pool for that particular job gets small, and so how do you attract more workers to that? Well, you start raising your wages. And this is simple economic common sense that they never ever want to go into, okay? And again, he goes into recently there's been a worrying polarization of wealth around the world. Last year, the top earning 20% of Americans received 49.4% of the income generated in the U.S. Okay, compared to just 3.4% made by the bottom 20% of earners. Okay, there's no problem with that as long as they did it honestly. And they're not stealing from their workers. And again, this is a theme that runs throughout all these arguments. And again, I ask you, if you're listening to the show and you work for somebody, are you being exploited? Did you agree to work for a certain wage for that employer with benefits and everything? And if they're fulfilling their obligations that you decided on, like a contract, how are you being exploited? I'd like to have people answer me that. And for the most part, a lot of folks won't. I got a stepsister who just flat out refused to tell me how she's being exploited. Let me get in here. In a free market, there are costs of wheeling and dealing. Advertising, insurance, and marketing are professions that make up around 6% of employment in USA. The labor, I don't like that wheeling and dealing, because that smacks of crony capitalism. And I think he adds that in there. Again, they're conflating the two. That's the problem with capitalism. Well, it's not capitalism if you have to go to the government to get regulations to stifle competition. That just isn't. The labor power here is effectively going to waste, since it does not create anything or directly make anyone better off. Advertising is obviously essential for businesses to sell their product, but the money spent on it could be much better used elsewhere if only sales were generated by other means. And again, you can tell this person isn't a business person. If you do not advertise your product, I don't care if it's through billboards or magazines or something like that, or sending sales reps out into the field and knocking on doors and introducing your product to folks, what's the point? No one's going to know you're building the product. Again, this guy does not have a real firm grasp of what actual business, entrepreneurs, capitalism, what they actually do to get things done. And I don't even say advertising is a necessary evil. Advertising is a necessary part of capitalism. You've got to let people know that you're there, and you got a product that might help them out of a pain point, but it's wasted. This is what happens in the planned economy of the USSR, where producers could concentrate all their resources on production and leave the marketing and distribution to the government, whereas nowadays marketing is in many respects more important than production. Is this how business should be? But you're talking about a command and control economy in USSR. Nobody owned private property. Nobody owned the means of production. The state felt that they owned every individual and determined everything in your life. And the state mandated. When I read this the first time, I fell off my chair. Here you have a state by law. You either comply, comrade, or we're going to kill you or send you to a gulag up in Siberia where you live out the rest of your life in misery. You either buy these products, which there were very few of. There was no competition. If they were building a car, they had one car manufacturer in Russia. And I can't even remember what the name of the car was, but it's like, you want a car? You have this choice of this black one, or this black one. And that's it. And he's using this as a comparison to free market capitalism. Do you see the problem with these arguments these folks are coming up with? Some goods and services are considered positive for society. You might get a vaccine against swine flu to protect yourself against getting the illness, and in doing so, reduce the spread of virus. This is the positive side effect on the rest of society, but it is unlikely that you considered it when making the decision. You only thought about protecting yourself. And I'm not going to finish up this article because I am getting long in this episode, but it just goes and goes and goes, and it's just erroneous arguments, conflating free market capitalism with crony capitalism, and just conflating, the USSR, the businesses could concentrate on production of items and let the government advertise for you. The government didn't advertise, they allotted. You had One type of toilet paper. It was John Wayne toilet paper on the shelves, folks. If you can imagine that, we had John Wayne toilet paper over in the USSR because it was rough and tough and didn't take crap off nobody. You know, you had one car. I was at the Ohio State Fair, agriculture fair, when I was in high school, a senior in high school, and they had a couple different sizes of Russian tractors over there. This was back in the height of the USSR. And those were so shoddily made that they wouldn't even have made it out of the door in any manufacturing plant in the United States. They would have never got past quality control. But in Russia, there was no competition to keep everybody honest. They put out what they put out. The government, if the government didn't like it, then they came in and threatened the folks. And most of the time, the government didn't care because it was being put out. We're living in a communist paradise, you know, here. And it just, again, some of these arguments, like I said, they're so fall off the log easy to dismantle. And the final one before I get to my piece de resistance. Top 10 greatest benefits of capitalism. This is by Jed and Rachel Nuno. While likely to be a very controversial list, we are in the middle of one of capitalism's favorite seasons, Christmas. And this was actually posted 12/24/2010. So it seems fitting to publish it on Christmas Eve. With the death of feudalism in the 19th century, a choice was presented to the world. Would the new political economic system be capitalism, communism, the third way, or an obscure alternative? Communism sounded great on paper but never really worked as intended, and the most well-known group within the third way movement was the Nazi Party, whether the rest of the movement liked it or not. Fortunately, the country in which we are living today is almost certainly capitalist, and this article will be investigated. Will investigate the numerous benefits of capitalism provides an equal, happy, healthy society where you can have almost anything you want for a price. With capitalism, more choices provided than ever before. You can eat low-fat food, organic food, free-range food, and you know exactly what you're getting due to the statistics on the packet. There's plenty of diets easily accessible and gyms with the top of the range equipment unparalleled in other countries. There is a greater awareness than ever for the importance of fitness due to government campaigns. All these contribute to an extremely fit society, and in dispersion, one can always resort to liposuction or some other sort of surgery, which is why everyone is thin and healthy, and the front magazine at least. Might seem a great, it might seem at first glance that everyone is selfishly working for their own money, but dig a little deeper and it becomes apparent that every job has a benefit for someone else. Factory workers produce the products that we can't live without. Hairdressers perform a service that benefits us body and soul. And the police work to protect us and make sure we live in a lawful society. Even unpopular and unpaid professions such as city bankers and sportsmen have a positive effect on society, whether it's helping us manage our money, entertainment, or something else. The bottom line is that no matter the job, highly or poorly paid, glamorous or dirty, competitive or easy, everyone can have the satisfaction that they, as much as the well-known public figures, are doing their bit for society. And it goes on down through there. No matter where you start in life, everyone has an opportunity to make it big. And that's one of the things that is inherent to free market capitalism. And my dad told me something that I live by ever since, or I've lived by it, ever since. A couple of things, some piece of wisdom he gave me. And the one is the only person holding me back from success is me. Period. If I'm not successful, I only have myself to blame. If I start blaming other people, then I'll never be successful. And I'm the only one that can measure my success. Not you, not anybody else can measure my success. One of the most common arguments that capitalists use is that capitalism works perfectly with human nature, or more specifically, greed. And it does. Greed is rewarded duly with a large amounts of money, and the entire economy is fueled by people working hard to furnish their own needs. And greed has really taken on a negative connotation. And, and the Bible talks about greed too. that we're not supposed to be greedy, and they're talking about when greed, they're talking about covetousness. But there's another definition for greed that's not bad. That we're taking care of ourselves. And if we don't take care of ourselves, nobody else is going to. And as we take care of ourselves, we contribute to society, just like a factory worker. When I was working at the door factory, I was doing fire core doors and putting, they were routing them out, and I was putting fire retardant back in the routes so they could offer a different line of doors. If I didn't do my job, someone else down the line couldn't build those doors, and the salesman couldn't go out and fix them or sell them. If the plant that was making the fire cores for us that we routed out, if they didn't do their job, I wouldn't have had a job. You see what I'm saying? Everything's interconnected. And that's what they're saying here. And I don't see myself as greedy. I see myself as, I have to take care of my family first. I have, some basic responsibilities to me and mine. But in doing those responsibilities, me and mine, I help take care of other people. But it goes down through here. I don't want to belabor this, but it goes down through. It's a pretty good article. I want you, this is part of your homework. Go read that. Let me know what you think. The 10 greatest benefits of capitalism. Now, let me get out of that one. Now, this is the one I wanted to get to. I sort of alluded to it if you're watching YouTube. This is by Edward L. Glazer, and he's an economics professor at Harvard. Now, this was written back in 2009, June 9th in 2009. This was right around when the economic meltdown was happening, and, we were feeling the full effects of it. A failure of regulation, not capitalism. And I've been saying this throughout the whole program, that they're conflating free market capitalism with crony capitalism. And they got to be the same. And they're not. They're nothing alike. The only thing they're alike is they got the same name. They got capitalism in their name. That's the only similarity. Everything else is not the same. Does the current crisis, we're talking about the housing bubble and everything that burst, and does the current crisis mean that capitalism has failed? In certain left-of-center quarters, there's an almost gleeful desire to leap from an economic downturn to the conclusion that the whole free market thing was always a big mistake. When faced with this question last week at the European Festival of Economics in Trento, Italy, my off-the-cuff response was too glib. I suggested that it was the regulators, not the capitalists, who had really failed. But there are some serious questions that lie between these ideological volleys. What has the current crisis taught us, if anything, about the weakness of capitalism? What lessons, if any, should we learn about the quality of government, and what does our new knowledge imply for reforms going forward? Now, this article here, let me bring it up in my Word because I know it's long. All right, where to go? Hang on a second. I gotta make sure it's okay. A failure regulation. I don't know why I wasn't reading that right. It's only 2 pages long, so it's not a long read. I did have one in here down lower that it was like 14 pages. We won't get into that because we're running out of my 2-hour allotment here. The events of the past 18 months certainly illustrate that financiers can be venal and dishonest. Some investment professionals appear to be more interested in their own earnings than in their clients' well-being. It was a surprise to you. If this was a surprise to you, then I hope that someone wiser has long had power of attorney over your investments. The second most significant lesson is that a decline of condominium prices in Las Vegas can distress banks in Frankfurt. Markets are extremely interdependent. So many banks bet so much on housing-related assets that the entire banking system was imperiled by a drop in the housing markets. The final lesson flows from the first two. Current markets are built on both private entrepreneurs and public law enforcement. For centuries, investors have relied on court-enforced contracts. Who would buy a company's shares if the law didn't impose a fiduciary duty on their issuers? And this is what I'm talking about, the fiduciary responsibility of the issuers of stocks. Every person with a bank account in the United States relies on the government to protect his or her assets, taxpayers also trust the government can make the cost of overseeing the banking system reasonable. So who failed? Certainly the shenanigans of Wall Street remind us that capitalists are not angels and that unchecked their mischief can do much harm. But the point of financial market regulation was to ensure that the misbehavior would not imperil the entire system. Our public system failed to protect taxpayers from the cost of bailing out investors. The failures of our regulators shouldn't be much more surprising than the wrongdoings of investment managers. After all, governments are made up of imperfect humans also. This crisis, like most previous crises, should remind us of the frailty of both individuals and our institutions. What does this frailty mean for future policy? Should we be increasing the size of government because the private sector is awful, or decreasing it because government is incompetent? I always prefer via the media, the middle way, which in this case means doing a limited number of things more effectively. The current crisis has revealed as utter fiction the idea that banks can fail without imposing costs on the rest of us. Since bank failures impose cost on everyone else, the bank system needs more regulations to internalize those externalities. Regulatory institutions need to be designed in ways that are stronger and less prone to being co-opted by the industry that they are meant to regulate. Our financial markets cannot operate without strong public protection from property rights, and there are times when such protections requires restricting the actions of private entities, at least when they are publicly insured. Now, this is where, and I'm not an economics professor, but I've read enough on economics to know that he is in support of this, banks are too big to fail. But one of the things that he fails to mention, and maybe he does elsewhere, but he doesn't in this article here, is he doesn't tell you that even though the banks own assets, those assets through a bankruptcy or when they fail and go through bankruptcy just don't go poof and they disappear. Those assets are still there and can be bought up by other folks. Would the financial system throughout the world take a hit? Yes, it would. But coming out the other side, would it be stronger if these bad actors were allowed to go through bankruptcy? I believe we would have. I believe, and this would teach the rest of the industry that, look, we're not going to bail you out if you do dumb and stupid, or if you cheat the system. You're going to be out of business. Somebody else is going to buy, or someone's multiple else is going to buy up your assets, and you're going to be gone. And then who's, honestly, in a free market scenario, who would hire those CEOs and the executives from that country or company who ran that company to the ground because they were doing dumb and stupid? Again, competition would take care of them. But it's foolish to react to a government failure and think that the right response is to vastly increase the scope of public activity. Last week I argued that if a government can't provide clean water, it shouldn't try to regulate vast swaths of the economy. The same panic point applies to the United States. A government that can't provide basic investor protection shouldn't try to run car companies. Certainly those who favor quixotic public schemes to fix the housing market seem to have learned little from the past public failures in housing. So he is making a good argument. He in a roundabout way, he's making this argument about, is the government the right entity to fix these things? Can it, if the government can't provide clean water? They're talking about Flint, Michigan. Now we're talking about a local government here, okay? And not every bank, let me go back to the bank thing, not every bank in the world would have took a hit. There was a lot of banks that don't participate in the investment markets, don't participate like other banks do. They voluntarily themselves have higher cash reserves than what the federal government requires, and because they want to remain solvent, and they didn't take a hit. Ford, they didn't take any TARP money because they rearranged money from their European operations to shore up the United States operations, so they didn't need TARP money. None of the foreign car manufacturers in the United States took TARP money. It was only GM and Chrysler that took TARP money. And I've talked on other shows about why they did that, okay? The battle between financial market regulators and private financiers is profoundly uneven. The private sector can offer essentially unlimited rewards to anyone who is skillful enough to manipulate the rules and create the financial advantages. One of the things, and I don't know if they've taken care of this, one of the things during the housing bubble or before, that the Moody's and Poor and the other credit rating agencies on Wall Street were being paid off to keep the credit ratings higher than what they should have been. Those derivatives, those bonds, the housing, the mortgage bonds and derivatives, stuff like that, technically should have been rated junk, because that's exactly what they were. But because the corruption going on in the financial and the regulatory schemes of the government, the credit reporting firms had a fiduciary incentive for not classifying them as junk, keeping them up as AAA, AA, stuff like that. And it just weren't, after the whole thing came out, they just were not that, and it destroyed a lot of people financially. Let me go on through there. That doesn't mean that the public regulators should give up, but the regulation is hard work and requires plenty of public resources. I do fear the hubris of moving to a wider public agenda before the financial markets basics are in place. And one of the things, there are free market solutions to all of this. Regulations and everything. But I think if the government would just pull back and enforce contracts, and if the credit rating agencies weren't being interfered with, weren't being corrupted with money, I think things would have changed differently. And I said, I don't know all the answers. I just think there's a free market solution to everything that happened in the financial markets. Again, saying it's too big to fail. That should have been our first signal to hold on to our wallets and or like the old meme say, here, hold my beer. I got this. And that's exactly what it was. These guys knew that the government wasn't going to allow them to fail, and they're going to use taxpayer dollars to prop them up. And that's what the TARP was, and that's exactly what they did. The Federal Reserve buying so much of these assets up. Fannie and Freddie Mae were one of the biggest perpetrators of what happened in the housing market with all these subprime mortgages and stuff like that. So again, there's a free market solution to all of this, but the one thing I want you to come away with on the show here today, and I know it's been almost 2 hours now, is that it's not capitalism, it's not free market capitalism that fails. It's a failure of regulation or over-regulation. It's when the government and business gets together, gets into cahoots, gets into bed together, when all the shenanigans happen. If the government would stay out of the economy, enforce contracts between folks, a lot of this stuff wouldn't happen. A lot of the stuff wouldn't happen. And if they would insulate the reporting agencies, the credit reporting agencies on all these stocks and bonds and everything like that, if they'd insulate them from the financial services and these guys come in and actually do their jobs and report what they find, then that would be, to me, that would be a plus also. I mean, it would really be a plus. Now, if you go to the DanClementShow.com show notes page, episode 943, there's a couple more down here. The Issue of Our Time by William J. Palmer over at FEE.org, and that talks about communism, and that's they're kind of, a couple of these are long reads. And then Why Socialism Failed by Mark J. Perry. Both these were from back in 1995. I was dusting off the FEE.org archives on these bad boys. And then finally, Even by Its Own Standards, Communism Has Failed Miserably by Marion L. Tupy over at FEE.org. He posted that in August or September of this year. So, again, a wealth of information over at the DanClementShow.com show notes page. Really, really a wealth of information over there. So I encourage you to go over and check that out. If you like the show, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down and comment either way. Leave some comments for me. Ask me any questions you want in the comments below the video. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe and hit the notification button so you know when I put up new videos. And I'm also looking for patrons to support the show. And I have a Patreon account set up, and I also have a PayPal account. If you go over to the DanClementShow.com and click on those buttons at the top of the page, it'll take you to the appropriate page and everything. This has been the Dan Clement Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your Constitution warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Folks, have a great rest of the day. Have a great Sunday. Remember to attend the Church of God's Choice on Sunday. And have a Merry Christmas and enjoy your time with friends and family. And we'll see you Tuesday at noon, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.